Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you tuning in from around the world. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. My name is Luke, and welcome to a very special How to Academy and Penguin Live event. Our guest today is Adam Grant, organizational psychologist, host of the TED podcast WorkLife, and the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books that have sold over 1 million copies and been translated into 35 languages. He was also Wharton Business School's top-rated professor for 7 straight years. Today, Adam will be in conversation with Tim Harford, OBE, author of the million-selling The Undercover Economist. Tim is a senior columnist at the Financial Times and the presenter of Radio 4's More or Less, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy and Cautionary Tales. After a 35-minute or so conversation, Adam will take questions from you, the audience. So please type any you have in the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. This is your chance to ask one of the world's most influential management thinkers a question, so don't miss out. Right, well, that's more than enough from me. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Adam Grant and Tim Harford. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Luke. So I'm Tim, and I have the honor of asking all the questions that have been burning at the front of my mind, the back of my mind, whirling around since I've read Adam's book. I'm not going to plug the book too hard because I understand many of you have shown the good sense to already order a copy, but I loved this book. It's absolutely terrific book. It's charming, it's funny, it's moving, it's relevant to the times we live in. It's full of great stories. It's full of actual facts, information, advice, research. It's brilliant. There's a small Venn diagram overlap of this book with my book, How to Make the World Add Up, and where the overlap is there. I kept thinking to myself, if only I'd read this book before I wrote mine. It's amazing. He's found research I hadn't encountered. He's expressed things better than I had. I want to hate him, but he's actually such a genuinely nice, charming guy and a pleasure to do business with. And you're in very, very safe hands for the next hour or so. So Adam, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And
thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. I have to say, we've never met before. I've enjoyed your work so much. I've loved your TED Talk. I've heard more episodes of Cautionary Tales than I can count. I've read multiple books. I feel like I know you, but we've actually never communicated out loud before.
Yeah, I feel like I know you very well because of the WorkLife podcast. About, I mean, we've emailed and so on, but yeah, there's something. Anyway, look, people don't want to love in. They want to hear about your ideas. So we're going to stop. It's a pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to finally be on a call together. And let me start where the book starts, although I'm sure we'll range very widely, by asking you about the Man Gulch fire. A very interesting story, and it sets up some of the ideas you want to explore in the book.
Yeah, it's really something that's haunted me since I first became an organizational psychologist. I think some people probably know Norman Maclean's book, Young Men and Fire, but if you're not familiar with the story, there's this horrible wildfire that smoke jumpers got called in to go and fight back in the 1940s. And this is in Montana, and the fire gets out of control. And all of a sudden they realize they have to run for their lives. And the foreman, Wagner Dodge, suddenly does something that nobody could make sense of. Instead of running to get away from the fire, he stops, he kneels down in the grass, and he starts lighting matches. And the crew thinks, what in the world is going on? This guy's gone insane. You can't start a fire in the middle of a fire that you're probably not going to survive if you don't run top speed. What is he doing? And so they just take off. What they don't realize is that Dodge has suddenly improvised the idea of building an escape fire. And the idea is that he can start a fire that will burn the grass around him, and then the wildfire will actually go right over him. And he lays down in the ashes of the fire and survives, basically breathing face to face on the ground for 15 minutes. And I think what Dodge did was he redefined what intelligence is for me, right? I thought about intelligence as the ability to think and learn. What we see Dodge doing, though, is showing the intelligence to rethink and unlearn, right? He has to reimagine fire as a path to safety, not a source of danger. That's, I think, the first big moment of rethinking. And then the second one is that tragically, 2 of the other firefighters make it out alive, and the rest don't survive. And it turns out that they're still carrying all of their heavy tools and equipment, the backpacks, the axes, the shovels. They didn't drop their tools. And later investigators calculated that if they had dropped their tools, it might have made the difference between life and death. And this is not unique to the Man Gulch fire. This has happened in other wildland firefighting events as well. And that's another missed opportunity for rethinking, right? To say, okay, normally I think about my tools as part of my identity, as necessary to doing my job. But here, my tools might actually be what stands between me and survival. And the inability to rethink that assumption, which was so ingrained in their training, right? Firefighters are taught that you need your tools in order to be effective and safe. I think that was the second missed opportunity. And Tim, I was gonna stop there. And then I read an article that led me to rethink a third assumption that I didn't even know was part of the equation, which is it turns out that wildfires are part of a healthy life cycle of force. And that assuming that, that there's nobody in immediate danger, which there wasn't in Man Gulch, they don't necessarily need to be fought at all. And so I think there was a missed opportunity for rethinking at the level of the profession in the field to say, you know what, sometimes we send in smoke jumpers and firefighters to solve a problem that didn't actually exist.
So the reason I find that really compelling is because you described three different types of rethinking. And I think you could say these are actually quite different cognitive processes. So the firefighters who didn't drop their tools, because the tools were part of their identity, that's kind of sort of tunnel vision. It's something they could do that's pretty obvious, but they're panicking, they're in a hurry, and they just don't think of it. The idea of setting an escape fire, that's, as you described it, it's this brilliant piece of improvisation. It wasn't taught in textbooks. It wasn't like this is part of their cognitive arsenal. If only they could think of it. It was a piece of brilliance. And then the third thing that you've described is some committee somewhere decided that it's a good idea to drop firefighters into danger to fight wildfires, despite the fact that the wildfires aren't actually posing anybody any danger, because they think that's a good way of managing forests. And at some stage, some committee somewhere finally decided maybe this is not the right way of doing it. So these are different processes. I mean, which do you think is the most important, or how would you distinguish between them?
Oh, that's a great question. I reserve the right to rethink my answer because I haven't put enough thought into this yet. But when I was writing the book, I felt like there was a tension between rethinking your knowledge, rethinking your assumptions, rethinking some institutional traditions and practices. And I think you're right that they might involve different kinds of cognitive skills. I think they share something in common though, right? Which is to have the humility to know what you don't know and the curiosity to go out and discover new things. And I think that it's hard to say which of that set of skills that you're distinguishing between is most important. I think it's probably going to vary by person, by context, maybe by point in time as well. But what's bothered me the most when it comes to the failure of people to rethink over the past year is the questioning assumptions, right? Assumptions that you might not even realize you hold, but when they're challenged, you resist. And the clearest example I can think of for this is a few years ago, I went to a bunch of CEOs and said, I would love to run a remote Friday experiment. I want to test what happens when people just work one day a week from anywhere. Let's get the productivity and the creativity effects of that. And all the CEOs turned me down. And they said, we don't want to open Pandora's box. We're afraid no one will ever come back to work. We think our culture is going to fall apart. There are a bunch of assumptions there that should have been tested and worked. Some of those CEOs have now declared we're going to be a permanently remote office. Right? And they missed the opportunity to learn all of 2018 and 2019 how to make remote work. And what I've said to them since, at least the ones that I've gone back to, is, look, I'm not saying that I was right and you were wrong. What I'm saying was that this was a great opportunity to run an experiment. You never would launch a product without A/B testing it. So why are you so convinced when it comes to the way that you work and collaborate and manage your culture that the way you've always done it is the right way?
But the A/B testing I'm all in favor. I think it's wonderful. That's often takes place within a little box. I mean, this is the problem you're describing. So like, there's a place in it. I mean, some organizations would never experiment about everything. It would just be hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. But a lot of organizations would say, well, we're experimental. We gather data, but it's within this little box, and this is where the experiments are allowed. And then outside that box, the experiments are not allowed. So why is that?
Why is that? I think I mean, the psychological explanations that I think are most compelling are, one, a sense of predictability and control, right? I want to know where my job is going, where my organization is going, where my life is going. And if I'm willing to experiment with too many things, then I'm opening myself up to a lot of uncertainty. And especially in the US, many of us are bad at tolerance for ambiguity, right? It's almost that we would have certain but wrong answers over uncertain but possibly right ones, because that gives us the comfort of conviction and allows us to avoid the discomfort of doubt. I think there are other factors that are more social, which have to do with belonging. So, I think there's a latent fear that a lot of people carry around that if I question, a bunch of behaviors or habits or customs that a lot of people are comfortable with, that I'm going to be excommunicated from my group, or that people are going to reject me or exclude me in some way. And I think that leads us to prefer stability over change, which obviously in the long run is a bad habit.
Something you said a moment ago, you were talking about the people who, it depends on the person and it depends on the situation. The ability to rethink depends on the person, depends on the situation. I don't know what the question I've got, but I want to know more about that. Like, are there certain situations like a global pandemic that forces us to rethink? I mean, other examples I've studied myself, I love the example of Keith Jarrett having to play a jazz concert with a piano that turned out not to work, and it turned out to be his most popular concert. Or there was a tube strike in London a few years ago, and at the end of the tube strike, 48 hours, a whole bunch of commuters never went back to their old commuting routes because they discovered a different way to get to work, and they realized they'd been doing commuting wrong their whole lives. So there's a situation where it's the situation that forces the people to think again. But from reading the book, you seem to have a lot of faith that there are certain kinds of people who are willing to think again, and that also that can be trained. You can encourage people to be the kind of person who thinks again, regardless of the situation.
I think all of the above is true. So let's take this as a both and moment. I think, situationally, I think you're onto something. The story that you've told about Keith Jarrett's unplayable piano is brilliant. And I don't think there's a week that goes by where I don't think about it, especially because I know nothing about music. And so I don't even know what it means to have a piano that doesn't play correctly. And so it's endlessly fascinating to me that you could do your best work on such a flawed instrument. But I think that speaks to something fundamental that we see in psychology, which is that constraints often push us to rethink. Right? You would think it's when we're doing well, when we're on top of the world, when we're at the very best of our game that we question ourselves. And I think with the danger of being in a position of excellence or of abundance is that we get complacent, right? We fall victim to the fat cat syndrome, and we like to rest on our laurels. It's when we're under pressure, under fire, when we have no choice but to rethink, just like the pandemic has done for so many of us over the past year, that we finally say, all right, you know what? I have nothing to lose. And now I really have no other choice. I think though that there are, to your point, there are people who are more inclined to do this, and some people who are much less comfortable doing it. So this goes for me to Phil Tetlock's classic paper on, are you a preacher, a prosecutor, or a politician? And once I learned about this framework, I could not unsee it. Right, I would find myself thinking like a preacher and basically believing I'd already discovered the truth, and my job was to spread it.
So just tell us a bit more about Tetlock's framework, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, so Phil's basic idea was that too much of the time when we study in social science decision making or judgment, we assume that people are like you, hyper rational economists, and that they're always trying to maximize efficiency and make the wisest choice. And Phil said, actually, no, we're much more concerned with the social implications of our judgments and our decisions than that. And when we form opinions, right, we want to think about, well, can I get other people to believe this, right? Can I preach it? Can I serve Kool-Aid that other people want to drink? And then on the flip side, I think my biggest vice in this framework is being a prosecutor. When somebody believes something that I think is wrong or inconsistent with strong evidence, I feel like it's my job to correct them. And that never goes well, but I'm sort of there trying to win an argument and make sure that they lose their case. And my worry there is that if you spend a lot of your time preaching and prosecuting, you're not willing to change your mind, because as a preacher, I'm right. As a prosecutor, you're wrong. And that means you need to do all the rethinking. I'm already enlightened. And then the third mindset that I think sort of leads us astray is thinking like a politician, which is I'm trying to appeal to an audience and win their approval. So I'm going to do all the campaigning and lobbying that I can to try to get them to like me or agree with me. And I might tell them what they want to hear, but I may not change what I think deep down. And I think that the people who spend a lot of time in these frames of mind, who do a lot of preaching, prosecuting, and politicking, they limit their own ability to question their assumptions and to second guess their knowledge.
So what you said leads us into, I want to talk about Phil Tetlock some more, because he's a very interesting guy. He's the Superforecasters guy. He's a colleague of yours, I think, right?
Yes,
yeah. So let me put a pencil in that or a pin in that, and we'll come back and talk about Tetlock. But I wanted to ask you about debating. In your book, you present quite a positive view of debating. You describe it as being akin to dance at its best. Okay, now so I should declare an interest. Adam, you are talking to the 1992 World Schools Debating Champion. Okay, I used to be good at this stuff, and I'm extremely jaded about it. You know, I'm like an ex-smoker. I'm an ex-debater. I feel very negative about it, and the reason I feel negative about it is because I feel it doesn't bring the best out of us. It encourages. It doesn't encourage good faith argument. It encourages, my side, your side, by design. The in-group, the out-group. A lot of debating is sort of performing to your own side, mocking the other side. This is certainly how debating works in the UK. You just look at presidential debates. Even when presidential debates are working well, you forget the last two presidential elections. Go back to presidential elections for 2012, 2008. You just think this is not the engagement and the clash and refutation of ideas that debating aspires to be. So, am I too negative about it? Can we do debating better in a way that really brings out, it helps us to rethink?
Well, should we debate this?
I think we are. So I'm a hypocrite already. I
mean, really, I'm going to win either way, Tim. No, I don't think the goal is winning, right? I think the goal is learning. And I think that the way you pose this question is interesting, because you basically just asked me if you should rethink your rethinking of debate. And I do want to applaud you before I answer your question, because you have all the incentives in the world to be invested in debate as an art form, because it clearly worked for you. And I don't see that many international debate champions who say, you know what, decided this is the wrong set of rules and I don't want to play the game anymore. So I really admire that. I think a lot of think again is about complexifying where people cling to simplicity. And I think that debate is a double-edged sword. I think there are things that I love about the form of argument, and there are things that I think are problematic. And so maybe we can break down some of the upsides and the downsides and figure out if it's possible to get the good without the bad. How does that sound?